Now, vibrato is one of those essential expressive tools for singers, but some singers are either intimidated by it or just puzzled. So I'm going to simplify it. We're going to learn what it is, how to do it, when to use it, and importantly, when to avoid it. Hi, I'm Scott, watching Inside Musicals, the channel for all things musical theatre. So what is vibrato? I mean, some people call it a wobble, a warble, a shimmer, and it can be any or all of those things. Literally, vibrato is simply a vibration. Practically, it's a pulsation on a sustained note. And we can hear the difference between a straight tone, E, and vibrato. E. Now, in most singers, it's a fluctuation of pitch and breath intensity. Now, the pitch element is a bit like a trill, but whereas a trill moves distinctly from one note to another, usually moving up from the first, vibrato is centered around the note and moves both above and below. Now, at its most subtle, it can be less than a semitone either side, but in a broad vibrato, think Judy Garland or Ethel Merman, it could be more than a couple of tones. So sleep, little baby. If you've never heard of Ethel Merman, and here I was thinking we could be friends. Funny how quick you go off some people. I'll come back to her shortly. Now, the breath element of vibrato is a bit like a tremolo, a rapid repetition of the same note. But in the voice, a strict tremolo gives a stop-start machine gun effect. Think Elmer Fudd laughing. We're hunting rabbits. But vibrato should be joined, so it's not tremolo. And of course, you might say, well, who would ever sing like that anyway? And I might say, the Bee Gees. I don't love you. And they tend to emphasise the breath fluctuation rather than the pitch variation. But really, vibrato should be both. So how do we sing vibrato if we've never done it before? I'll give you two sound images. The first is the idea of a car starting but never quite turning over on the word ni. Ni. And it's okay if it sounds coarse at first. The point is that it's pulsing, that it's joined. Now, you could just beat your chest so there's a continuity of breath. Ni. But then there's no pitch variation. And you look pretty weird when you're singing. The image I prefer is the cliche of a sobbing ghost. Oh. Because really, vibrato does give that sobbing, emotional quality to the voice. So to work up to it, let's simply slide up and down through part of our range cleanly on an or sound. Whoa. And notice that it's a continuous breath because we want to maintain that. So now let's add the sob. Whoa. Now that's a ghost. And notice how it falls into a natural rhythm. Now, I might be wrong, but whereas a trill feels very deliberate, like the larynx is doing all the work, in vibrato, I think it's that subtle movement of the breath that supports the larynx for those pitch fluctuations, and it feels so much easier. And I think it's that combination that allows the pitch and the breath to fall into the same rhythm. Now, if you still can't get your head around it, here's another approach. Let's slow it down and we'll scoop up to the same note over and over, but with a slight emphasis at the top. Oh. Then just try making yourself laugh and notice how that falls into a natural rhythm. And that's probably about the speed of your natural vibrato. But then notice how that laugh separates the sound like the tremolo when we want it joined more like the sob. So let's put that together, starting with that slow scoop, then speeding it up to a sob at about the speed of the laugh. That's a lot to remember, isn't it? Oh. And that's vibrato. But once we get used to this sobbing sound, we can control where we put it. So let's try moving from straight tone into vibrato. E. And notice that shift from relative stillness in the chest and throat to a bit of movement. Because really that's what vibrato brings to the sound, a bit of movement and life. That's what we want from vibrato. And we'll come back to that. So now we've discovered the natural speed of our vibrato. You'll notice you can actually go a little faster, a little slower, and still feel natural. And the best singers, whether they're aware of it or not, often time the rate of their vibrato to the tempo of the song that they're singing. So depending on the speed, there could be eighth notes, 16th notes, triplets. So let's try duple time, say 16th notes in a 4/4 bar. And now I know. And then some triplets. And now I know. And notice how in this instance the triplets feel more laid back because they have a different rhythm. So why even bother with vibrato? I mean, opera singers have always embraced vibrato, and not just as a stylistic convention of opera, but because those fluctuations in sound, that shimmering of vibrato, sets up much more complex resonances in the room that help their voice cut through the orchestra. Because even to this day, a lot of opera is still not amplified, or at least not to the extent that maybe a Broadway show might be. And coming back to Ethel Merman, this is probably why her vibrato was so wide, because she grew up in the era of vaudeville when there were no mics. And so her brassy tone and those fluctuations in pitch from vibrato helped carry her voice to the back of the room. Now, it's great in theatre, but in film or the recording studio, which are much more intimate, she was just a bit too big, which is probably why we didn't see her in more movies. So if vibrato intensifies the sound, we can use it to emphasise a note or an emotional moment. So we can use it to help shape a phrase. It can help a sustained note evolve, so it's not just static. It can reinforce a crescendo or a decrescendo. And that subtle movement in the throat can help us recenter our tuning if we're falling off pitch. So there's more than one reason to use vibrato, but where to use it is really a matter of taste and style. Think of it as a flavour. It's not the main course, we just want it to pepper our performance. So use it wisely. Generally, it's better reserved for longer notes, because on short notes it can sound laboured and pitchy. There ain't no love here. There ain't no love here. Now, a slow vibrato in a fast song could easily get lost because it's too subtle, whereas a fast vibrato in a slow song could be jarring. So just use common sense in terms of the speed of your vibrato. Now, vibrato varies from one genre of music to another. In musical theatre, which is descended from opera, it tends to favour a strong vibrato traditionally, whereas in contemporary music, they tend to use vibrato more sparingly. It favours a brassy power note that's maybe just tickled at the end with a touch of vibrato. And this is one reason why a lot of musical theatre or opera singers aren't convincing in contemporary music if they can't control or adapt their vibrato. Now, as for ensembles, unless you're, say, a gospel choir, most choirs sound cleaner with less vibrato because the harmony sounds tighter, particularly if it's a cappella. And the same with overdubbing contemporary backing vocals, because those thick vocal stacks sound better clean and synth-like. Of course, some styles don't use any vibrato at all, use only straight tone. I'm thinking motets, plain song, monastic chants, certain folk styles. And so if you're not familiar with vibrato, one of the best things you can do is just listen to music so you can recognise it. Start with some solo cello. Notice how they use vibrato. Listen to some famous opera singers, Maria Callas, Pavarotti, Domingo, Renee Fleming, Barbara Bonney, or singers of the jazz era, Andrews Sisters, Frank Sinatra, or compare the broadness of Judy Garland and Ethel Merman to, say, the lightness of Doris Day and Ella Fitzgerald, because those two really adapted their style for the intimacy of the recording studio. What do Whitney Houston and Gaga have in common? How do Ed Sheeran and, say, John Legend navigate vibrato? Once you can hear vibrato, the easier it is to reproduce it. But like any new singing technique, vibrato is going to feel obvious, fake, awkward at first. And that's okay. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be, and the more it'll feel like second nature, like breathing, which is largely what it is. So what vibrato tips do you have? Or what other vocal techniques do you find tricky? Leave me a comment. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I really do love you.